Today on the show, we're diving into the world of economic indicators. These are the numbers that tell us how the economy is doing. Things like GDP, unemployment rates, and consumer confidence. But what do these indicators really mean? How are they calculated? And how should we interpret them? We'll break it all down for you with the help of some experts to make sense of the numbers that shape our world. Dr. Jason Lee walked through the bustling hospital corridor with a confident stride, his white coat flapping behind him. He was young, ambitious, and always one step ahead of his colleagues. In his mind, he was already destined for greatness. This hospital, the prestigious Glendale Medical Center, was just the beginning of what he imagined would be a long and successful career. He was the golden boy of the medical staff, known for his sharp skills and even sharper wit. But there was one thing Jason didn't account for, a lesson in humility that would come from the most unexpected place. It was a regular Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. Jason was wrapping up a consultation when a nurse rushed in, informing him that there was a new patient waiting for him. She mentioned that the patient was a VIP, but Jason had seen plenty of high-profile individuals before. He didn't think much of it. Another celebrity trying to get a quick fix, he thought with a smirk. When he entered the room, he saw a man sitting quietly, reading a magazine. The man had messy hair, a plain hoodie, and a calm demeanor. He didn't seem like anyone important. "Mr. Reeves?" Jason asked, checking the chart on the clipboard. The man looked up and nodded, a faint smile on his face. Jason, however, didn't think twice. He was more focused on his own day than paying attention to who this patient might actually be. "So, Mr. Reeves," Jason began, glancing over the medical notes, "I see you're here for a routine checkup, but honestly, you could probably fix this with a good diet and some exercise. Maybe try something other than your usual routine next time. Get out of the movies for once. Or maybe a role where you actually look like you care about your health," Jason joked, completely unaware of who he was talking to. The patient's smile barely wavered. "I see," he said calmly. Jason chuckled, thinking nothing of, come on, you've been in some movies that make people think you don't care much for your well-being. You know, the usual action hero stuff." Keanu Reeves just nodded, still holding that composed expression. Jason didn't even realize what he had said, how rude and out of line he had been. But Keanu? He didn't react. He simply listened, as if processing the words without any hint of offense. What will happen when Jason realizes who he just insulted? How would you handle this situation if you were in Jason's shoes? The story has just begun, and it's already shaping up to be an intense ride. But before we dive deeper into the shocking aftermath, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens next in this unbelievable tale. Jason Lee's life had never been easy. Born into a modest family in a small town, he always felt like he had to prove himself. His parents, though supportive, were far from wealthy, and Jason knew from a young age that if he wanted to escape the confines of his small world, he would have to work harder than anyone else. He studied late into the night, taking extra courses, and sacrificing a normal childhood for the sake of his ambition. By the time he entered medical school, Jason was already driven by the idea of being the best. The long hours, the sleepless nights, the endless exams, they didn't faze him. He knew that the end result would be worth it, a life of prestige, respect, and financial security. But somewhere along the way, Jason's focus had shifted from helping others to proving his superiority. He'd started to believe that his intellect and skills were the sole factors in his success, forgetting the humility that originally drove him. Now, as a young doctor at Glendale Medical Center, Jason had reached a level of confidence that bordered on arrogance. He was known for his sharp mind, but also for his sharp tongue. He often mocked colleagues and patients, especially those he deemed beneath him. The patients were nothing more than case studies to him, and if anyone dared to question his methods, they were swiftly dismissed. His reputation for excellence and his dismissive attitude had earned him both admirers and enemies. In contrast, Keanu Reeves had a different story, a one of quiet humility, resilience, and deep personal growth. Unlike Jason, Keanu never sought attention. He had built his career slowly, step by step, and had faced plenty of hardships along the way. From a young age, Keanu had learned the importance of kindness, empathy, and being grounded, no matter how much fame or wealth came his way. Keanu's rise to fame in Hollywood was meteoric, but he had always remained unaffected by it. He was known for his generosity and his ability to stay out of the limelight. People admired him not just for his acting, but for his genuine, humble nature. Keanu didn't need to flaunt his wealth or status. He preferred to use his influence for good. Despite his fame, Keanu lived a simple life. He was not the kind of person to draw attention to himself, especially when it came to personal matters. He had a quiet, down-to-earth lifestyle and was involved in many philanthropic efforts. He believed in the power of helping others without expecting anything in return. However, few people knew that Keanu had an ownership stake in several businesses, including Glendale Medical Center. While most employees and patients assumed he was just another celebrity with too much time on his hands, Keanu's investment in the hospital was a reflection of his desire to make a positive impact on the world. He wasn't just an actor, he was a philanthropist with a deep sense of responsibility. When Keanu walked into the hospital that fateful day, he didn't expect to be treated any differently from any other patient. He wanted to maintain his privacy and go unnoticed, blending into the crowd like any other person. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As Keanu sat there in the examination room, his thoughts were calm, almost meditative. He wasn't fazed by the unintentional insult from Dr. Lee. He had experienced far worse in life and had learned long ago to take such comments in stride. Keanu knew that the only thing that mattered was being true to himself. If Jason, or anyone else, couldn't see beyond the surface, that was their loss. But what Keanu didn't expect was how the situation would unfold next, how a single comment, one made by someone who barely knew him, would change Jason's entire life forever. Sachi. Stage was set. Jason had no idea who he had just crossed, and Keanu had no intention of revealing his true identity, at least not just yet. What will happen when Jason learns the truth? Will his arrogance cost him his career? The tension is building, and things are about to take an unexpected turn. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where we dive deeper into the consequences of Jason's words, and how Keanu's unexpected role as the hospital's owner will flip Jason's world upside down. But before we move on, make sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss what's coming next in this shocking story. The next few days at Glendale Medical Center were tense, but Jason Lee hardly noticed. He was wrapped up in his own world, busy with patient files, running tests, and trying to prove himself. His self-assurance had grown since his last encounter with Keanu. He didn't think much of it, convinced that his skills were more than enough to make him untouchable. The world seemed to bend to his will, but things weren't the same. Jason began noticing subtle changes in the way people treated him. The nurses were polite but distant. The senior doctors, whom he'd previously seen as rivals, were now avoiding eye contact. He tried to brush it off, assuming it was just a coincidence. But when he entered the staff room one afternoon, the atmosphere was different. Charged almost, Dr. Allen, the head of surgery, was speaking to a colleague when Jason walked in. As soon as Jason entered, the conversation stopped. Dr. Allen gave him a cold nod, quickly excusing himself. The other doctor, a resident named Sarah, glanced at Jason nervously before hurrying out of the room. Jason's brow furrowed. Something was off. Later that afternoon, as he passed by the administrative office, he caught a snippet of a conversation between a nurse and one of the hospital administrators. He didn't even know who he was talking to, the nurse said in a hushed tone. "I can't believe he was so rude to Mr. Reeves." Jason froze. Mr. Reeves? Could they be talking about the same patient? He brushed it off, but a nagging feeling remained. The next day, Jason was scheduled to meet with a new patient. As he reviewed the case notes, he noticed the name on the chart, Keanu Reeves. His heart skipped a beat. "Wait, is this the same guy?" Jason muttered to himself. Keanu Reeves? The name meant nothing to him outside of Hollywood. He quickly shrugged it off, focusing on the task ahead. When he entered the examination room, there he was again, Keanu. The same calm presence, the same serene expression. "Mr. Reeves," Jason began, trying to act as if nothing had happened. He had no idea whether the patient had recognized him or not, but he figured he would try to make up for the awkwardness. Keanu glanced up, his expression unreadable. "Dr. Lee," he said simply, offering a small nod. Jason wasn't sure if Keanu remembered their previous encounter. After all, the man seemed so composed and unaffected, but the air in the room felt different now. The tension, which had been building silently, was undeniable. Jason began his routine checkup, trying to steer the conversation toward medical matters. But his mind kept drifting back to their earlier interaction. He had insulted this man, mocked him, without even knowing who he was. And now he was stuck in this uncomfortable situation. "How's the family?" Jason asked, trying to make casual small talk, not realizing how awkward it sounded. Keanu's lips twitched slightly. "I'm doing fine, thank you," he replied, his voice calm. "Everything's been good." Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Keanu's demeanor was polite, but there was an underlying stillness to him, an almost chilling calmness. Then it happened. As Jason finished his examination and made his way to the door, Keanu looked up from his chair. "You know, Dr. Lee," Keanu said softly, "sometimes it's not the things you do that matter the most. It's how you treat people, especially when you don't know who they are." Jason froze mid-step. He turned back, but Keanu was already back to his calm, unreadable self. Jason's mind was racing now. What did Keanu mean by that? And how did he know exactly what had been bothering Jason? As Jason left the room, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The cryptic words, the cold reception from his colleagues. He suddenly realized what he had done. Keanu had heard every word, and worse, Keanu was someone he should never have disrespected. Jason's heart pounded as he stepped into the hallway. He felt a wave of panic surge through him. What if Keanu had already told someone? What if this was going to cost him his career? Could he recover from this? As the hospital staff continued their work around him, Jason couldn't escape the feeling that his actions had set off a chain of events he couldn't control. It was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. What will happen when Jason's past arrogance catches up to him? The tension is building, and the true nature of Keanu's identity is still hidden. How will Jason react when he finally learns the full extent of his mistake? Will his career survive the fallout? Things are about to take a dramatic turn in the next chapter, one that will change Jason's life forever. Make sure you're subscribed to see how this story unfolds. The following week, Jason's life began to unravel in ways he never could have anticipated. It all started with a call, an unexpected phone call that would set the stage for the most shocking moment of his career. It was a Friday afternoon, and Jason had just finished a long surgery. Exhausted and barely able to focus, he was getting ready to leave the hospital when his phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, but the caller ID displayed Glendale Medical Center, Administration. "Hello?" Jason answered, trying to mask the fatigue in his voice. "Dr. Lee, this is Karen, the hospital administrator. I need you to come to the executive office immediately. Mr. Reeves has requested to meet with you." Jason's stomach dropped. Mr. Reeves? The same Mr. Reeves he had insulted just a few days ago? Jason's thoughts raced. Could it be possible that Keanu was actually going to confront him? Maybe he would get a chance to apologize and smooth things over, but the way the conversation had gone before left him feeling unsure. Was Keanu coming to confront him about the disrespectful things he had said? "Of course," Jason said, his voice betraying a hint of nervousness. "I'll be there right away." When Jason walked into the executive office, his nerves were on edge. The office was sleek and modern, a stark contrast to the more clinical spaces in the hospital. The walls were lined with art, and a large glass window offered a view of the sprawling city outside. But Jason barely noticed any of it. His eyes were locked on the man sitting behind the polished desk, Keanu Reeves. Jason froze. This was no longer the quiet, humble patient he had met a few days ago. This was the man in charge, the owner of the entire hospital. Keanu sat behind the desk, his posture relaxed but his gaze intense. His eyes, once calm and collected, now held a quiet power, a weight that Jason couldn't ignore. "Dr. Lee," Keanu said with a slight nod, his voice calm, "please have a seat." Jason felt his heart race. He wasn't sure how to react. His initial impulse was to apologize, to beg for forgiveness, but something held him back. Instead, he took a seat, trying to maintain his composure. "I'm sure you're wondering why I called you here," Keanu continued. His voice was steady, his expression unreadable. "The truth is, I don't usually get involved in the day-to-day operations of this hospital. I'm not here often, but I've been informed about something that happened during your consultation with me." Jason's throat went dry. He could feel his palms sweating, and a cold wave of realization washed over him. "I see," Keanu said, his voice calm. "You didn't recognize me when I came in, did you?" Jason gulped, finally understanding the gravity of his mistake. No, I didn't," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Keanu leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "You made some comments that I'm sure you didn't mean to be hurtful, but they were nonetheless, well, they were disrespectful." Jason swallowed hard. I never meant to offend you, Mr. Reeves. Honestly, I didn't realize who you were. I was out of line, and I'm truly sorry. I didn't mean what I said. It was just a stupid comment." Keanu's eyes softened just a fraction, but there was still an air of authority in his gaze. "I understand that. I've had my share of misunderstandings in life. But what I think you're missing, Dr. Lee, is that I don't hold grudges. Life is too short for that." Jason's relief was short-lived, as Keanu's next words hit him like a ton of bricks. "However," Keanu continued, "this hospital is not just a place for medical professionals to grow. It's a place where people are supposed to feel safe, valued and respected. I don't tolerate arrogance or disrespect, and from what I've been hearing, you've been treating your colleagues and patients with a lack of respect. That's something that needs to change for the sake of the entire hospital." Jason was stunned. He had thought Keanu would come here to yell at him, maybe even fire him, but instead, Keanu was speaking calmly, almost like a mentor, urging him to look within. "I've been told that you've made it difficult for people to work with you," Keanu said, his tone still calm but firm. "I don't want to see you fail, Dr. Lee, but if you continue this path, I'm afraid your future here will be short-lived." Jason sat in stunned silence, the weight of Keanu's words crashing down on him. For the first time in years, he felt small, insignificant even. He had always been so focused on proving his worth, on being the smartest, the best, that he had neglected the most important part of being a doctor: compassion, humility, respect for others. Keanu's gaze softened, as though sensing Jason's inner turmoil. "I'm giving you a chance, Dr. Lee. This is your opportunity to learn and grow. You're talented, but you need to remember why you became a doctor in the first place. You have the power to help people. Don't squander that." The silence in the room was thick with meaning. Jason couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken to him like this, someone who was both powerful and compassionate, someone who wasn't afraid to hold a mirror up to him. Keanu stood and extended his hand, his expression still kind but resolute. "I'll give you a second chance. But the choice is yours. Do better, Dr. Lee, for yourself and for the people around you." Jason took Keanu's hand, his mind racing with emotions. This wasn't just a second chance. It was a wake-up call. He had been given an opportunity to change, to make things right. What will Jason do with this opportunity? Can he change his ways, or will he continue down the path of arrogance and disrespect? Keanu's words have shaken him to his core, but the question remains: can Jason rise to the challenge? Find out in the next chapter, where the stakes get higher and the consequences of his actions come to full light. Don't miss what happens next. Be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss the dramatic turn this story is about to take. Jason stood there staring at Keanu's extended hand, his mind swirling in a whirlwind of emotions. He had expected a confrontation, a reprimand, maybe even an ultimatum. What he hadn't expected was this calm, thoughtful lecture that shook him to his core. For the first time in years, Jason felt his arrogance waver. The sharp, confident facade he had built over the years, the one that had shielded him from vulnerability, began to crumble. Keanu's words spoken with both strength and kindness, had pierced through him in a way nothing else ever had. He took Keanu's hand, feeling the firmness of the handshake, but there was an odd sense of warmth in it as well. It was an offering not just of forgiveness, but of a chance at redemption, a chance to rebuild not just his career, but his character. Jason sat down, feeling the weight of the moment. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "I don't know what to say. I've been so focused on myself that I didn't see the bigger picture. I didn't see the people around me. I've been blind to how my behavior affects others." Keanu nodded slightly, his expression unchanged, but his eyes softening. "That's the first step, Dr. Lee. Acknowledging where you went wrong. Now it's up to you to take responsibility for it." Jason was silent for a moment, his thoughts drifting back to the people he had hurt. His colleagues, the nurses who had begun avoiding him, the patients who had felt dismissed by his arrogance. He had been so caught up in proving his worth that he had forgotten the reason he became a doctor in the first place: to help people. "I'll change," Jason finally said, his voice filled with determination. "I will. I'll be a better doctor, a better colleague. I'm not proud of how I've been, and I'll work hard to earn back the respect I've lost." Keanu nodded approvingly, though there was still a quiet seriousness in his demeanor. "That's all I can ask for, Dr. Lee. But remember, change doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, effort, and consistency. You'll need to prove yourself, not just once, but every day." Jason absorbed every word. He knew Keanu was right. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. He had burned many bridges, and now it was up to him to rebuild them. But for the first time in a long while, Jason felt hopeful. He could feel the possibility of a new beginning on the horizon, one where he could grow as both a doctor and a person. Later that evening, as Jason walked through the hospital halls, he noticed the atmosphere was different. People greeted him with polite smiles, though there was still a sense of distance. The coldness hadn't completely dissipated, but it was a start. He knew he had a long way to go before he would earn back their trust. But he was ready to put in the work. Jason went straight to the break room to grab a quick coffee before heading home. As he entered, he saw a few of the nurses standing by the counter. They exchanged a few glances, and Jason could feel their uncertainty. He hesitated for a moment, but then decided to take a step forward. "I owe you all an apology," he said, his voice steady but sincere. "I've been disrespectful and arrogant, and I've made it hard to work with me. I'm sorry for that. I promise I'm going to change, and I'll do everything I can to make sure you feel valued." There was an awkward silence, but then one of the nurses, Sarah, stepped forward. "I appreciate that, Dr. Lee," she said softly. "We've all noticed the change. It'll take time, but we're willing to give you that chance." Jason nodded, feeling a small weight lift off his shoulders. This was just the beginning, but it was a step in the right direction. He knew he couldn't undo the damage overnight, but he was ready to prove that he could be the doctor and the person he always wanted to be. The next day, Jason received an email from Keanu. The subject line read, "Meeting with the Board, A. New direction for Glendale Medical Center." Jason opened the email, which outlined plans for an upcoming board meeting where Keanu would be discussing new initiatives for the hospital. It included changes to staff training, patient care, and overall hospital culture, efforts to foster respect, compassion, and collaboration. Keanu's name was signed at the bottom with a note. "I believe you have what it takes to be part of this change, Dr. Lee. We'll discuss your role in the meeting." Jason felt a surge of pride mixed with anxiety. Keanu was giving him an opportunity to not just redeem himself in the eyes of his colleagues, but to become part of something bigger, part of the hospital's transformation. The pressure was on, but it was exactly what Jason needed. As he prepared for the board meeting, Jason reflected on everything he had learned. His actions had consequences, but they also opened the door for growth. Keanu had given him more than just a second chance. He had given him the chance to truly make a difference in the lives of others. The true test begins now. Jason's journey was just starting. With the weight of responsibility on his shoulders and the opportunity to prove himself before the board, the stakes couldn't be higher. Would he live up to Keanu's expectations? Could he reshape not only his career, but his approach to life and medicine? The next chapter promises to reveal the consequences of Jason's actions, how he will navigate the challenge ahead, and whether he can rise to the occasion. Will he remain committed to change, or will the pressure break him? The days leading up to the board meeting were a blur for Jason. He found himself buried in hospital protocols, reviewing policies, and sitting through training sessions designed to improve staff interaction and patient care. It was more work than he had ever anticipated, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a chance, an opportunity to prove that he could evolve. Jason spent late nights poring over his notes, revisiting his patient interactions and speaking with his colleagues. He could feel the slow but steady shift in his relationship with them. Where they once avoided him, they now treated him with guarded respect. His apology hadn't erased everything, but it had opened the door for a new start. The change, though small, was enough to give him hope. The morning of the board meeting arrived quickly, and Jason could hardly suppress the nervous energy buzzing through his veins. He'd spent hours rehearsing his speech, making sure he was prepared to contribute meaningfully to the discussion. The meeting was going to be pivotal, not just for his career but for his personal growth. When Jason arrived at the boardroom, he was met with a mixture of familiar faces and a few new ones. The room was sleek, modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. Keanu sat at the head of the table, his usual calm presence unmistakable. He offered Jason a nod as he entered, a silent acknowledgement of the progress Jason had made. As the meeting began, Keanu stood and addressed the room. "Good morning, everyone," Keanu began. "We've made some incredible strides in the past few months, and we're about to make some changes that will shift the culture here at Glendale Medical Center. But it's not just about policies, it's about people, the way we treat each other, the way we treat our patients, and the way we treat ourselves." Jason shifted in his seat, listening intently. Keanu's words resonated with him in a way he hadn't expected. It was as if Keanu was speaking directly to him, not just as a patient, but as someone who understood the importance of humility and respect. "We've all seen how the hospital has grown in recent years," Keanu continued. "But growth requires more than just expertise. It requires emotional intelligence, compassion, and a commitment to personal development. That's why, moving forward, we're implementing a new mentorship program. We're going to pair senior doctors with younger residents, ensuring that everyone has a chance to learn not only the technical aspects of medicine, but also how to foster meaningful, respectful relationships." Keanu paused, and Jason could feel the weight of his words settle in the room. This wasn't just another policy change. It was a cultural shift. Keanu wasn't just investing in the hospital. He was investing in the people who made it what it was. Jason's heart raced as Keanu turned to him, his eyes steady. "Dr. Lee," Keanu said, his voice calm but clear, "you've made a significant effort to change your approach to both your colleagues and patients. I'm impressed by your growth, and I believe you're ready to take on more responsibility here. As part of this new initiative, I'd like to offer you the role of mentor to our junior residents." Jason blinked, stunned. The offer was more than he had ever expected. Not only was he being recognized for his efforts, but he was being trusted to guide others, to become part of the very change that Keanu was trying to create. He felt the weight of the responsibility, but also the excitement that came with it. "I'm honored, Mr. Reeves," Jason said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I'll do everything I can to live up to your expectations and the standards you've set." Keanu nodded, a small but genuine smile playing at the corners of his lips. "I know you will. The best doctors are the ones who continue to learn and grow, no matter where they are in their careers. And now it's time for you to pass on what you've learned to the next generation." As the meeting continued, Jason found himself reflecting on the path that had brought him here. He had been arrogant. He had been dismissive of others. He had let his pride cloud his judgment. But in the space of just a few short weeks, everything had changed. Jason wasn't the same man he had been when he first started at Glendale Medical Center. The arrogant, self-assured doctor, who had once been more concerned with being the best than with being kind, had been replaced with someone who understood that success wasn't just about individual achievement, it was about how you helped others along the way, and it wasn't just about the recognition. The opportunity to mentor young doctors wasn't a reward, it was a challenge. It was a chance for Jason to prove that he could be the kind of doctor, the kind of person who helped others grow, not just professionally but personally. Later that evening, Jason sat at home reflecting on the day. The offer from Keanu had filled him with a quiet sense of pride, but it also brought with it a deep understanding of just how much work lay ahead. He had taken the first step toward change, but the journey was far from over. He wasn't going to rest on his laurels. He knew that to truly make a difference he had to remain vigilant, both in his personal development and in how he treated those around him. As Jason sat on his couch, his phone buzzed. It was a message from one of the nurses, Sarah, the same one who had acknowledged his apology a few days earlier. "Hey, Dr. Lee, just wanted to say thank you for your honesty the other day. It hasn't gone unnoticed. I think you're really starting to turn things around. Looking forward to working with you." Jason smiled. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to him. It was a sign that he was on the right path. What happens next for Jason? Now that he's been given the chance to mentor, he faces the ultimate test. Can he sustain this change? Or will old habits resurface? His journey isn't over yet. The challenges are just beginning. Jason had never been more aware of his own weaknesses than in the weeks following the board meeting. The role of mentor was not just a professional challenge, it was personal. He wasn't simply tasked with teaching his junior residents the skills they would need to excel in the medical field. No, this was about showing them a new way of being, a way to lead with empathy, humility, and respect. As he met with his first group of residents, bright-eyed, eager young doctors full of potential, Jason felt the weight of his responsibility. They were all looking to him for guidance. They saw him as a model of success, a symbol of where they wanted to be in just a few short years. But Jason knew that he had to be more than just an example of medical expertise. He had to show them how to be people who cared, who listened, who put the patient first, and who valued the people they worked alongside. At first it was hard. Jason felt the sting of his past arrogance every time he interacted with them. The very same traits that had made him a successful doctor, his ambition, his drive, his confidence, were the ones that had made him difficult to work with. And now, in a role where collaboration and emotional intelligence were paramount, he struggled to let go of those old habits. One of the residents, a young woman named Emily, seemed to notice his discomfort. She was bright, thoughtful, and quick to ask questions. She was also a natural leader, the kind of person who made others feel comfortable with her warmth. Emily was the first to approach Jason after a particularly tense meeting in the hospital cafeteria. "Dr. Lee," she said gently, "I've been working with you for a few weeks now, and I can see how hard you're trying. But I think you might be pushing yourself a little too hard." Jason looked at her, surprised. "What do you mean? I know you want to be a better mentor, but it seems like you're trying to prove something to yourself. Maybe you're not letting the changes come naturally, and it's okay to ask for help or admit when you're struggling." The honesty in her words caught him off guard. He had expected criticism, but not this. Emily wasn't attacking him. She was offering him insight. Her perspective was one that he hadn't considered, but it resonated deeply. She was right. He had been so focused on proving that he could change that he hadn't allowed himself the grace to simply evolve at his own pace. Jason sighed. "You're right. I guess I've been trying too hard, but I don't want to fail you or the others." "You won't," Emily reassured him, smiling. "None of us are perfect, Dr. Lee. We're all learning together." That simple exchange with Emily planted a seed in Jason's mind. Maybe he had been trying to overcompensate for his past mistakes. He didn't need to be perfect. He just needed to be authentic. And the more he allowed himself to be authentic, the more he could truly connect with the residents he was mentoring. The next day, Jason walked into the hospital with a renewed sense of purpose. He no longer felt the pressure to be flawless. He was allowed to make mistakes, to ask questions, and to learn alongside the young doctors he was mentoring. It wasn't about the title or the position. It was about the relationships he was building, the trust he was earning, and the ways in which he could make a real impact on the lives of the residents under his care. One morning, as he rounded the corner of the hospital's emergency wing, he ran into Keanu. It was a chance encounter, but it was a moment that made Jason pause and reflect. "Keanu," Jason said, catching his breath, "I just wanted to thank you for everything. You gave me a chance when I didn't deserve it, and you pushed me to be better, not just as a doctor but as a person." Keanu smiled, his usual calm demeanor unwavering. "You did the work, Dr. Lee. I didn't push you. Your own growth pushed you. All I did was give you the opportunity. You're the one who seized it." Jason felt the weight of Keanu's words. He realized that Keanu wasn't just offering him a second chance. He was giving him the tools to change his own life. But it was up to Jason to use them. A few weeks later, Jason found himself at a crossroads. One of his residents, Thomas, had made a critical mistake in his diagnosis. It wasn't life-threatening, but it could have been. Jason knew that the way he handled this situation could make or break the trust he had worked so hard to build. He sat down with Thomas in the break room, a quiet, serious conversation that felt different from the way Jason used to handle things. In the past, he would have berated Thomas for his mistake, driven by a need for perfection. But this time, he saw it differently. "Thomas," Jason began, his voice steady but kind, "I know this was a difficult case and I understand why you made the decision you did, but it's important to remember that we need to be thorough. We have to consider every possibility, no matter how small. It's not just about getting the diagnosis right, it's about making sure we don't miss something crucial for our patients." Thomas nodded, looking down, ashamed. "I know. I let my confidence get in the way. I didn't double-check everything like I should have." Jason sat back and took a deep breath. "It happens. What matters now is what we learn from it. I'm not here to tear you down. I'm here to help you grow. We all make mistakes, but we learn from them and move forward." Thomas looked up at Jason, his eyes grateful. "Thank you, Dr. Lee. I'll be more careful next time." Jason smiled, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. This was what being a mentor was about. Not just correcting mistakes, but guiding others through the process of learning, growing, and improving. He wasn't just teaching Thomas how to be a doctor. He was teaching him how to be a human, how to face challenges, and how to grow from them. That night, as Jason walked home, he reflected on the progress he had made, not just in his career, but in his life. He had started this journey as a man driven by ego, someone who believed that his expertise alone would carry him to the top. But now he was learning that real success came from understanding, from humility, and from the willingness to change. Jason knew that the road ahead would still have its challenges. There would be moments of doubt, moments when he questioned whether he was doing the right thing. But for the first time, he felt at peace with the process. He wasn't finished yet, but he was on the right path. What lies ahead for Jason? Now that he's embraced the role of mentor and seen firsthand the impact of his actions, will he continue to evolve, or will the old habits creep back in? The journey is far from over, and with every lesson learned, there's more to discover. Jason had always been a man of ambition, but the pressure of being a mentor weighed heavier on him than he had anticipated. Each day he found himself being tested in new ways, not just by the residents he was responsible for, but by the expectations placed on him as a member of the hospital's leadership team. With Keanu's encouragement and the support of his peers, he had taken on more responsibility than ever before. And yet, as much as he had grown, the challenge was becoming increasingly difficult to balance. His residents, Emily, Thomas, Sarah, and the others, looked up to him, and Jason felt a deep sense of responsibility for their development. He wasn't just teaching them how to diagnose or treat patients. He was teaching them how to navigate the complex emotional landscape of medicine, how to deal with their failures, how to build relationships with their colleagues, and most importantly, how to be compassionate, caring individuals in an often cold and demanding profession. But it wasn't just the residents who needed his attention. The hospital board had been placing pressure on Keanu and the leadership team to deliver results, faster, more efficiently, and with higher patient satisfaction. With each new initiative, Jason's workload increased. He found himself working late into the night, poring over reports, analyzing data, and strategizing for the future of Glendale Medical Center. It was during one of these late-night sessions that Emily knocked on his office door, interrupting his focused concentration. "Dr. Lee," she said, stepping into the room. "I've been here for hours. You need to take a break." Jason rubbed his eyes and glanced at the clock on the wall. It was already 10 p.m. "I know, there's too much to do. The board's asking for results and we need to make sure everything's in order for the next phase of the hospital's expansion. It's all happening so fast." Emily stood by his desk, her expression concerned. "You can't do it all yourself, Jason. You've been carrying the weight of this hospital on your shoulders and you're burning out." Jason shook his head, trying to dismiss the concern. "I'm fine. Just a little tired, that's all. I'll get through it." But Emily wasn't having it. "You're not fine. You're pushing yourself too hard, and I get it. You're used to being the one who has to do everything. But you've taught us that we need to lean on each other. You don't have to do this alone." Her words cut through the tension he hadn't even realized had been building inside him. For a moment he just stared at her, wondering how he had become so caught up in the demands of the hospital that he had forgotten the very lesson he had been trying to impart to others. "It's okay to ask for help, I'm sorry," Jason said quietly. "You're right. I've been so focused on proving that I can handle everything, I forgot to lean on the people around me." Emily smiled softly. "You don't have to prove anything, Jason. You're a great doctor and you're a great mentor. Just don't forget to take care of yourself." Over the next few days, Jason started to take Emily's words to heart. He made a conscious effort to delegate more, to trust his team, and to ask for help when he needed it. It wasn't easy. There was still a part of him that resisted. He had always prided himself on being self-sufficient, on being the one others turned to when they needed answers. But as the hospital's operations continued to grow and evolve, he realized that he couldn't do it all alone. One evening, as he was finishing up a meeting with his team, Keanu stopped by to check in. "How's everything going, Jason?" Keanu asked, his voice calm as usual. "It's a lot," Jason admitted. "I've been trying to keep up with everything, but it's been overwhelming. The hospital's changing so quickly, and I don't want to let anyone down." Keanu nodded, understanding. "I've been there," he said quietly, "but you don't have to do it all yourself. You're surrounded by capable people. Trust them. Trust yourself." Jason sighed, feeling the weight of Keanu's words. It had been so easy to get lost in the details, to focus on the next challenge, the next task. But in doing so, he had forgotten the bigger picture. The hospital wasn't just about patient care or board meetings or numbers on a report. It was about the people, the doctors, nurses, residents, everyone who worked together to make the place run. "I've been trying to do everything," Jason admitted. "And I think I've forgotten why I became a doctor in the first place. It wasn't for the title, or the power, or even the recognition. It was because I wanted to help people. And somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that." Keanu gave him a knowing look. "You're not alone in that. The pressure gets to all of us. But you're not here to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. We're all in this together." In the days that followed, Jason made a concerted effort to reconnect with his passion for medicine. He found himself spending more time with patients, walking the halls of the hospital with a renewed sense of purpose. He reached out to the residents he was mentoring, encouraging them to focus on the personal connections they made with their patients, to remember that medicine was about more than just science. It was about compassion. He also made sure to take breaks, to step back when things got too overwhelming. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to be vulnerable, to ask for help and to trust the people around him. It was during one of these moments of reflection that Jason received a call from the board. The hospital's latest patient satisfaction report had come in, and to his surprise it was the best the hospital had ever seen. Keanu had been right. The results weren't just about the numbers, the policies, or the technology. It was about the people. Jason had learned that the foundation of a successful hospital was built on trust, compassion, and collaboration. And as he looked back at everything he had accomplished and the road still ahead, he realized that he was finally starting to understand the true meaning of leadership. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about learning, growing, and helping others do the same. What comes next for Jason? Jason has come a long way since the arrogant, overworked doctor he once was. But with new challenges on the horizon and more responsibilities on his plate, will he be able to maintain the balance he's worked so hard to achieve? The next chapter will test him in ways he never expected. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where Jason faces a new crisis that threatens everything he's worked for. Will his newfound growth be enough to handle the pressure? The hospital had been running smoothly in the weeks following Jason's realization that he couldn't carry the weight alone. With his renewed focus on mentorship and collaboration, morale among the residents had improved. The staff was more cohesive, and the patient satisfaction metrics were at an all-time high. Jason, for the first time in a long time, felt a sense of accomplishment. But just as he began to feel at ease, a new crisis struck, one that would test everything he had learned about leadership. It started with an emergency meeting called by Keanu. Jason had just finished a long day in the hospital when Keanu's message pinged on his phone, summoning him to the boardroom. As he entered, Keanu was pacing the room, his expression grave. "What's going on?" Jason asked, his pulse quickening at the sight of Keanu's tension. "Sit down, Jason, we've got a situation," Keanu said, his voice low. "A severe outbreak of a resistant bacterial infection has hit our ICU. We've had multiple cases in the last 24 hours, and it's spreading fast. The patients are critically ill." Jason felt a knot form in his stomach. The ICU was the most vulnerable part of the hospital, where the most fragile patients were being treated. An outbreak of any kind in that area could spread rapidly and result in devastating consequences. "What's the plan?" Jason asked, his mind racing through potential solutions. His training as a doctor kicked in, but the reality of the situation was much bigger than anything he had dealt with before. "We need to get ahead of this," Keanu replied, his eyes scanning the room. "We have to isolate the affected patients, but there's a shortage of the necessary antibiotics, and the hospital is running low on protective equipment. We also need to mobilize our infection control teams immediately to prevent further spread." Jason nodded. He could already feel the weight of the responsibility shifting back to him, and the familiar tension in his chest returned. This was the kind of situation that demanded quick, decisive action. But it also required calm leadership, a trait that Jason had been working so hard to cultivate. "I'll make the rounds in the ICU," Jason said, already heading for the door. "I'll speak with the medical staff, update them, and see what resources we have on hand. We can't afford to waste any time." Keanu looked at him, his gaze heavy with expectation. "Be careful. We don't know how widespread this is or how long it's been circulating. We may need to close the ICU temporarily if the infection is as bad as it seems." Jason paused at the door, taking in the gravity of the situation. Closing the ICU would mean diverting critical patients to other hospitals, a risky move that could compromise patient care. It was a decision that had to be carefully weighed. "I'll be in touch," Jason said, his voice steady, even though the turmoil inside him was undeniable. The hours that followed were a blur of medical jargon, logistical challenges, and difficult decisions. Jason and his team worked tirelessly to isolate the infected patients and distribute the remaining antibiotics and protective gear. He had to make quick decisions that impacted patient care, sometimes choosing which patients would get prioritized, knowing full well that not all of them could be saved. It was the kind of ethical dilemma that every doctor faced at some point in their career, but it never got easier. As he moved from room to room in the ICU, Jason's mind kept racing. He kept reminding himself to stay calm, to keep a level head. But with each passing hour, the pressure was mounting, the hospital's resources were stretched thin, and the clock was ticking. Every moment felt like a countdown. When he finally finished his rounds, he headed back to the conference room to meet with Keanu and the rest of the hospital's leadership team. They were all waiting, their faces drawn with exhaustion. "Where do we stand?" Keanu asked, his voice carrying a note of urgency. Jason ran his hands through his hair, his eyes heavy with fatigue. "We've isolated the patients who tested positive for the infection, but it's hard to say how many more are infected. We need more antibiotics, more protective equipment, and we need them fast. The supply chain is already stretched, and if we don't get those resources soon, I'm afraid we'll have to make even more difficult decisions." The room fell silent, the weight of Jason's words hanging in the air. "We're already at capacity in the ICU," one of the board members spoke up. "If we close it down completely, we risk overwhelming the rest of the hospital." Jason nodded, understanding the complexity of the situation. "We're working on it, but we need to make sure we contain the infection before it spreads beyond the ICU. If it hits the general population, the fallout could be catastrophic." "Agreed," Keanu said. "Let's stay focused. Jason, I'm putting you in charge of coordinating the response on the ground. I'll handle communications with the board and local authorities. We need to be transparent with them, but we also need to make sure we don't cause unnecessary panic." Jason felt the familiar pressure settle in his chest. The weight of responsibility was like a heavy mantle, but this time it was different. He wasn't alone. He had a team, and they were all working together to tackle this crisis. The next few days were an unrelenting blur of long shifts, exhaustion, and moments of doubt. Jason found himself falling back into the old habits he had fought so hard to overcome. The pressure was just too much, and with each passing hour, he felt himself slipping. It was Emily who found him slumped over a desk late one night, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "Jason," she said softly, walking into the room, "you've got to take a break. You're pushing yourself too hard." Jason looked up at her, surprised to see her standing there. "I can't. The ICU is still full. We don't have enough resources to manage this outbreak. I have to stay on top of everything." "You don't," Emily replied, her voice firm. "You've been doing this for days without rest. You're no good to anyone if you burn out." Jason sighed deeply, feeling the weight of her words. She was right. He couldn't keep going like this. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the patients, the staff, and the hospital. "I know," Jason said, his voice hoarse. "But I don't know what else to do." Emily placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone in this, Jason. You've taught us that. Lean on us. Trust us. We've got your back." Jason took a deep breath, the knot in his chest loosening slightly. For the first time in days, he felt a glimmer of hope. He didn't have to do it all himself. And with that, he allowed himself to rest, to trust his team, and to rely on the strength of those around him. What comes next for Jason? The crisis isn't over, and the stakes are higher than ever. With the hospital on the brink of collapse, will Jason be able to rely on his team and his own growth to navigate this challenge? Or will the pressure prove too much to bear? The next chapter will reveal whether Jason can truly embrace the collaborative leadership he's worked so hard to cultivate. The true test of his transformation is yet to come. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where Jason's ability to lead will be pushed to its absolute limit. Jason had managed to find a brief moment of peace after Emily's intervention, but it was short-lived. The outbreak was far from over, and the stakes were only rising. Despite his efforts to delegate and trust his team, the pressure kept mounting. The hospital was running on fumes, and the staff was stretched thin. Days blurred into nights as Jason worked tirelessly, trying to keep things under control. But now a new challenge had emerged, one that Jason hadn't anticipated. The hospital was facing a potential legal crisis. Several families of patients who had contracted the resistant bacterial infection were beginning to speak out, questioning the hospital's preparedness and response. Rumors were circulating that Glendale Medical Center had known about the outbreak before it had been publicly acknowledged, and now there were concerns about lawsuits. Jason stood in his office, staring at the phone in his hand. A call from Keanu was coming in. He hesitated before answering. "Jason," Keanu's voice came. Through tight and strained. "We've got a situation. The families are organizing a press conference tomorrow. The media is starting to ask questions, and we need to get ahead of this. The board is breathing down our necks, and they're looking to you for answers." Jason's stomach churned. He knew this moment would come, but he had hoped it wouldn't be so soon. The crisis in the ICU had felt like the only thing that mattered. Now he realized how many different battles he was fighting at once. "I understand," Jason said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. "I'll handle the response. I'll talk to the families and we'll address the media. We can't afford to let this spiral." Keanu let out a breath of relief. "Good. I knew I could count on you. Just don't try to do it all yourself, okay? We're in this together. I'll handle the legal team, but we'll need your leadership on the front lines." Jason nodded, even though Keanu couldn't see him. "I'll get on it right away." The next morning, Jason found himself standing in front of a room full of worried families, medical staff, and legal advisors. He had prepared himself for this moment, but as he looked at the faces of the grieving family members, his heart felt heavy. He knew how important it was to maintain transparency, but he also understood the delicate balance between honesty and protecting the hospital's reputation. "Thank you all for being here," Jason began, his voice calm but firm. "I understand that you're all facing a difficult time, and I want to assure you that we're doing everything we can to address this situation. Our first priority is the health and safety of our patients." He paused, scanning the room, meeting the eyes of the family members in front of him. He could feel their pain, their anger, their frustration. This was no longer just about an infection. It was about the trust between the hospital and the community. "We've been working tirelessly to contain the outbreak and treat those who have been affected. I know there are concerns about our response, and I want to be as transparent as possible. We have faced challenges with resource shortages, but we've taken immediate steps to address these issues and prevent further spread of the infection. We are doing everything within our power to make sure this doesn't happen again." One of the family members stood up, her voice trembling with emotion. "My father was one of the first to get infected. He's been in a coma for days. How can you say you're doing everything you can when you don't even have enough antibiotics? This is a failure on your part, and we're not going to let it slide." Jason's heart sank, but he remained composed. He couldn't blame her for being angry. Her father was suffering, and that pain was being directed at him, at the hospital, at the system that was supposed to protect them. "I understand your anger," Jason said, his voice softer now. "I truly do, and I am deeply sorry for what you and your family are going through. This situation has been a nightmare for everyone involved, but please know that we are doing everything possible to save your loved ones. We're working with other hospitals and organizations to get more resources, and we are not stopping until we find a solution." The room was heavy with emotion, but Jason knew this was just the beginning. He would have to face the media next, a much larger and far less forgiving audience. But first, he needed to leave this room with a sense of closure, to make sure the families felt heard, even if the hospital couldn't undo the harm that had been done. "Thank you for trusting me with your concerns," Jason concluded, his voice firm once more. "I promise you that we will keep you informed every step of the way. We will get through this together." As he left the meeting, Jason felt drained. The weight of the family's pain and anger was suffocating, but he knew he had done what he could. His next challenge awaited: the media. Keanu was waiting for him in his office, a grim expression on his face. "You handled the families well," he said, his voice tight, "but the press is next, and they're going to be brutal." Jason nodded, taking a deep breath. He had dealt with the media before, but this was different. The hospital's reputation was on the line, and he was the one who had to stand in front of the cameras and take the heat. They walked to the press room together, where the cameras were already set up. Jason took his place at the podium, feeling the eyes of dozens of reporters on him. The questions started immediately. "Dr. Lee, how do you explain the outbreak at Glendale Medical Center? Was this a case of negligence on the part of the hospital? Can you assure the public that you're doing everything you can to prevent further outbreaks? What are you doing to address the shortage of antibiotics? How do you respond to accusations that the hospital delayed acknowledging the outbreak?" Jason kept his composure, answering each question with as much honesty as he could muster. He didn't have all the answers, but he wasn't going to lie. He stuck to the facts. The hospital was doing everything it could to manage the situation. They were working with other institutions to secure resources, and they were committed to transparency and accountability. At the end of the conference, Jason felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. The media frenzy would likely continue, but he had taken the first step in restoring trust. It wasn't going to be easy, but he had the strength to face it. He had learned the importance of leadership, not just in times of crisis, but every day. As the weeks passed, the situation began to stabilize. The outbreak was contained and the hospital received additional resources to continue treating patients. While the legal battles were far from over, Jason found a sense of peace knowing that he had done everything in his power to lead the hospital through the storm. Keanu stood by him through it all, offering guidance when necessary, but always allowing Jason the space to grow into the leader he was becoming. And through it all, Jason remained connected to the core of what he had always wanted, to help people, to lead with compassion, and to never lose sight of what really mattered. Reflection. And growth. In the aftermath of the crisis, Jason's role at Glendale Medical Center was more crucial than ever. He had proven to himself and to others that leadership wasn't about perfection. It was about growth, about learning from mistakes, and about embracing the responsibility to care for both his patients and his team. As he stood in front of his team one last time before heading into the new phase of recovery, he knew that this chapter in his life was just the beginning. What will Jason's future look like? Jason had learned the true meaning of leadership, not as someone who does everything on their own, but as someone who can guide others, trust his team, and take responsibility for the collective good. Now, as Glendale Medical Center moves forward, Jason will continue to evolve as a leader, one challenge at a time. The future may be uncertain, but with the lessons he's learned, Jason is ready to face whatever comes next. Final engagement. Now that you've followed Jason's incredible journey, what are your thoughts on the challenges he faced? What would you do if you were in his position? Leave a comment below and don't forget to share the story with your friends.